American. And when we speak of Ida B. Wells, let's understand the courageous nature of that incredible American who used her skill, her profession, her calling as a journalist, as President Biden noted, to help open the eyes of our nation to the terror of lynching, which speaks, of course, to the role that we have known also historically. I'm going off script for a moment about the importance of the black press and the importance of making sure that we have the storytellers always in our community who we will support to tell the truth when no one else is willing to tell it.
Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known on this Wednesday, March the 30th, 2022. President Biden on Tuesday signed into law the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, finally making lynching a federal hate crime after centuries and after more than 200 previous attempts to pass the measure. During the signing ceremony, as you saw here, Vice President Kamala Harris went off script, taking a moment to praise the black press for keeping its audience informed and not being afraid to speak truth to power. That and more this morning as we discuss with Sam Collins of the Washington Informer and his colleague, our colleague, James Wright. Hey, good morning, guys.
Morning.
Let's start at the top. James and Sam, Emmett Till legislation, the Anti-Lynching Act on Tuesday, signed into law finally. Sam, I'm going to start with you. What took so long?
You know, oftentimes in the United States, power does not bend to consciousness, does not bend to a matter of what is right and what is just. It is often, change often happens with pressure, grassroots pressure, as a matter of fact. And it's no coincidence that after 200 or so tries that the legislation finally passed in the era of George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, and the countless other brothers and sisters who have been lynched by police forces and people with no police power, but who have institutional power just the same. So although it is a celebration, we have to keep in mind the context of the moment and what it took for us to get here. It is my understanding by studying history and by studying the politics of today that what has happened is happened for no reason but public pressure and the need to rectify as best as the political system can the horrors of yesterday that continue to this day.
Yeah, and James, the measure passed the Senate unanimously. 3 House Republicans, however, voted against it. Andrew Clyde of Georgia, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, and Chip Roy of Texas. They were the lone votes. What do you make of those reps, and they are in the South, voting against this anti-lynching bill?
Well, Stacey, first of all, I want to thank you for being patient with me. I am at Georgia Avenue off of a McDonald's off of Georgia Avenue, and I thought that things would be slower, but we seem to be a little bit busy today. I do want to reflect on what your question is in terms of the federal lynching legislation. It was first proposed in 1900. The NAACP picked it up in 1909, and it's been so long for this to take place. And it's not because they haven't tried, it's because those Southerners for so long had power, and those Southerners are now the Republicans, to block the legislation coming through. Not so much on the House side, but on the Senate side. But we finally got it through, as Sam alluded to, and hopefully the Justice Department will execute on it as it should be.
Well, and Sam, real quick, I'm going to ask you that question. Those 3 Republicans who voted against it, they're all in southern states. Isn't some irony there that they would vote against this?
Man, I think the bigger point to make is the issue of states' rights and how states' rights has always been an impediment in acquisition of power and racial justice. And state power And in a federalist system like the United States has always been the buffer to maintain oppressive systems, even as the federal government attempts to do what it does to rectify its mistakes. So it's no surprise to me that Southern states, which also kept Jim Crow alive, which also attempt to dilute voting power, would also be against anti-lynching legislation.
Yeah, David Youngblood writes in that states' rights is white rights. And real quick, James and Sam, Vice President Kamala Harris, as we showed at the top, went off script talking about the importance of the Black press. Were you surprised, A, and B, why is that significant that she used that moment to extol the virtues of the Black press?
Yes, I was. And let me tell you why I was surprised. I actually read the statement. I get emails from the White House, and she mentioned Ida B. Wells, who really spent a great deal of her career fighting lynching, writing about lynchings, talking about lynchings, and trying to avoid getting lynched herself. Because she had to leave Memphis because of her writings. I was very proud the vice president did bring her up. I think it was very important that she was brought up. I was very proud the vice president talked about the Black press, because the Black press has been the only medium to really talk about lynchings. And while the vice president didn't exactly say that, that is exactly what she meant. So she did a good thing, Stacey.
Absolutely. Sam, a quick comment on that?
Without a doubt, Ida B. Wells is one of my favorite ancestors, just given the fact that in addition to talking about lynching, she talked about the causes of it, and she outlined how white women in particular were very pivotal in perpetuating that system of repression during the Reconstruction era. While I don't really have much to say about what Vice President Harris had to say about the Black press, my only hope to people who read the Black press and support us is that they won't hold it against us when we take the Biden administration to task. Because just as they signed the anti-lynching legislation, President Biden's budget reflects modern day lynching in a sense, with money going to the military budget, with money going to police forces, statewide and federal, as well as to ICE. So on one hand, the United States is attempting to rectify a mistake politically, but they're still perpetuating systems that oppress people of color, particularly people of African descent. So if you are going to congratulate the Black press, keep in mind that the Black press, as it always has, will stick to its responsibility, hopefully, in making sure that the Biden administration, as well as anybody who's in the White House, is held responsible for what they're doing and what they're not doing.
And this is one of the reasons we love to have Sam Collins on, because Sam will speak truth to power all the time. Also in the news this morning, the Food and Drug Administration has granted permission for a second COVID-19 booster shot, a fourth for those already receiving the additional dose. The authorization is for individuals 50 and older, which is which health officials have said would provide extra protection for the most vulnerable population if infections spike again. The FDA has previously approved fourth doses for those 12 and older with severely compromised immune systems. So another dose, Sam and James, are we getting to a point? It seems like we're getting to a point, I should say, where like the flu shot and like other shots, this is going to be a regular thing.
Stacey, you're absolutely right. And we just have to understand we live in a COVID world. We have to understand that we may be in the situation where people will have to get their yearly COVID shots, just like we're supposed to get our yearly flu shots. And it's important that people do that, because that's the only way we're going to flatten the curve. And, it's so sad that we've lost so many people. I've lost a few personal friends because of this disease. But one of the main reasons why I lost them is because they would not get the shot. And so you better believe when that shot is authorized for folks like me, I will be the first in line to get that booster. And I'll be very proud to do it.
Sam, your thoughts on the additional booster?
The spirit is telling me to practice transparency. I am a religious objector to the COVID vaccination, and I am in no way I am in no way critical of anybody who chooses to get it. I look at the medical system holistically, and if you look at the numbers as far as COVID is concerned, COVID hit hardest those who had underlying conditions, and COVID was an indictment of a medical system that was already in jeopardy, that jeopardized the lives of Black people in low-income communities for centuries, particularly in the post-civil rights era when money went to the military-industrial complex instead of hospitals. So when you're talking about a new disease that came up on the scene, and instead of treating the medical system holistically, experimenting with new ways of treating the disease and hooking people up to ventilators that were killing them faster than COVID did, you're talking about a medical system that that was playing trial and error with an illness. And while I'm not a medical professional by any means of the word, I am somebody who who pretty much is of the mindset that we got to look at things from a public health standpoint. And in speaking about the vaccine, once again, my objection is personal, and I really don't criticize anybody for taking up the stand of taking the vaccine. But keep in mind that the main impetus for pushing the vaccine was to reopen the United States again. And even with boosters, boosters often indicate that the vaccine changes form from time to time. So here we are, we're playing trial and error in real time. And not from my standpoint, once again, not really thinking about the health of people in the United States, but thinking about how best to return to normalcy, even though things will never, ever be normal again.
Yeah, Sam, again, we appreciate Sam's straightforwardness. Every time I talk to Sam, it just feels like, and I've never talked to these individuals before, but it feels like I'm talking to Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and to some extent, Muhammad Ali, all wrapped in one. So it's always a privilege to talk to Sam and James as well. Also in the news this morning, politicians are just that. They're politicians for the most part. They say what's popular at the moment, but one politician in general can never be accused of just going along to get along. And that is New York City's rep from the Bronx, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC. AOC is putting out a loud call for Clarence Thomas to resign or to be impeached. The representative said that the Supreme Court justice should resign after it emerged that his wife had pressed the Trump White House in text messages to try to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. She says if not, his failure to disclose income from right-wing organizations, recuse himself from matters involving his wife, and his vote to block the January 6th commission from key information must be investigated and could serve as grounds for impeachment. Again, Rep. AOC, we've had her on this program once before. She is always outspoken. Sam, your thoughts? We'll start with you on Representative Ocasio-Cortez's call for the impeachment of Clarence Thomas.
Let's take a step back in time to Anita Hill, to the Clarence Thomas confirmation, and to his spouse's actions toward not only those politically, but those who live in her neighborhood of Maryland. And it escapes my mind once again, wherever else the Thomas family lived in the United States. And this speaks to how politics is not just about elections and positions. Everything is political, even down to who you marry. And who you marry is very reflective of your politics. And by no means am I criticizing, well, I guess to a degree I am criticizing him for who he married, and I think that at the very least, Supreme Court Justice Thomas should recuse himself from anything concerning January 6th, especially given the fact that his wife conspired, and it is evidence that she conspired to spark the civil war on the U.S. Capitol that day. So we're talking about a holistic political picture that is pretty much dictated by who this man chose to marry, and he wanted power, and that's one way you get power, by choosing who you marry.
Yeah, and so James, so Jeannie Thomas has, as Sam said, has been exposed and in a big way with January 6th. Her complicity in that is, people can debate, well, she didn't actually go to the Capitol building, but neither did Donald Trump, right? So with that, can we say her actions, and I agree totally with AOC and Sam on the fact that at least on those January 6th rulings, he should recuse himself, which he has not. But can we put the sins of the wife on the husband?
Come on, let's be real. We know good and well that Justice Thomas knew what his wife was doing. And we know just as well that Justice Thomas knew that his wife was at that January 6th pre-rally in which Trump spoke. She was there. He knew that. He knows that. And as Dan Rather said on Twitter, when did Justice Thomas know and when did he know it? So there's no question that he should recuse himself from any case dealing with January 6th. But I would go as far as to say that he may seriously look at stepping aside in general. Now, let me just say this real quick. You're talking to someone who has actually had the honor, and I'll say honor, of interviewing Justice Thomas and winning a big NNPA award because of my interview with Justice Thomas in 1995, courtesy of my friend Armstrong Williams. But this is not right. Jenny Thomas knew what she was doing, and this is wrong. And I think that not only should he recuse himself from any cases from January the 6th, he really needs to look at stepping down.
You know, and we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but it reminded me a little bit, well, a whole lot of the Judge Stephen O'Neill in the Bill Cosby case. His wife, during the trial, she led protests against Cosby. She funded groups to protest against Cosby as well, and yet he refused to recuse himself as well. As I said, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but just, you know, from experience and knowing that happened, it kind of reminded me of that. But you know, this is against the backdrop too. You think about Rep. AOC's call for him to be removed. Basically, you think about what happened last week with Justice Ketanji Brown, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and how mistreated she was, and then you look at the other side and see how Clarence Thomas, no one says a word. You know, at least on the Republican side, says a word about his behavior, his wife's behavior. Talk about that a little bit, Sam. When you think about this overqualified judge who they put through the ringer last week, as opposed to Clarence Thomas and what's going on with him.
Well, Clarence Thomas is part of the good old boys club, you know, boys, and I would say good old girls women's club, forgive my language on that. But in reading about Clarence Thomas, he often, his conservatism was adopted in learning about Malcolm X and learning about the ideals that Malcolm X espoused about self-determination and self-sufficiency. And he perverted that to meet his agenda in terms of not advancing the rights and protections that Black people and other historically oppressed classes of people have sought in this country. In terms of what happened to the nominee for the Supreme Court, Miss Brown Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, what I will say to that is that one particular portion that has not been talked enough about is how Senator Lindsey Graham, in a sense, put Mrs. Jackson into a corner when he mentioned Dr. Leonard Jeffries. For those who don't know who Dr. Leonard Jeffries is, and I'll be very brief, Dr. Leonard Jeffries is a Pan-African professor out of New York, and Judge Jackson invited him to Harvard as a Black student representative during her tenure there. And he said some things, or he has said things in the past that are very unsavory, you know, to some people at least, about white people and about European Jews in particular. So in speaking about Leonard Jeffries during that committee hearing, right in front of Judge Jackson, he in a sense put her in a corner and pretty much forced her to disavow him, to disavow what he said. And oftentimes this is what is done to Black leaders in the spotlight. Black leaders are often forced, even as liberal of the policies that they pass, they are forced to make statements and to disavow aspects of who they are in order to fit the mold of what the white moderate conservative and the more moderate white conservative forces of America want them to do. So there was some difference in how Ketanji Brown Jackson and Clarence Thomas were treated during their confirmation hearings. But in talking about the system holistically, any black person who enters power, they do not have power in a sense when they are being forced to uphold modernism, and conservatism, and they will be forced to do so in order to fit the mold of what the United States wants, because you do not make it to the confirmation of the Supreme Court without making some people mad or without making concessions, particularly as it relates to police reform.
Yeah. No, great commentary, Sam, as always. James, so we see Rep. Ilhan Omar also joining AOC and calling for Justice Thomas's impeachment. Is this going to go anywhere, James?
My initial reaction is no, but let me just say this. If people stand up and people make their feelings known, this could go somewhere. Now, could it lead to his impeachment? I don't think so. Could it lead to his Justice Thomas's resignation? That is quite a possibility. His recusal from January the 6th cases, more than likely. But the important thing is that I think there's an undercurrent, and I have to be very coy how I say this. There's an undercurrent that may be telling Justice Thomas, it may be time for you to move on, or you have served your purpose. Now, what is the justification behind that undercurrent? I don't know. I will tell you a lot of people are thinking about that. The important thing is that we have to keep an eye on this process. We want to make sure that things are fair for Justice Thomas, but he has to come forward and tell the truth about knowing what his wife's activities were. And if he has to pay the price, he has to pay the price. This is the line of work he signed up for.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam and James, also in the news this morning, today, California's first in the nation task force on reparations, they have reached a crossroads with members divided on which Black Americans should be eligible for compensation as atonement for a slave system that officially ended with the Civil War, but still reverberates today. Some members want to limit financial and other compensations to descendants of enslaved people, while others say that all Black people in the U.S., regardless of lineage, suffer from systemic racism in housing, education, and employment. So the task force, they're ahead of what Representative Sheila Jackson Lee is trying to do on a national level. California has already passed their reparations bill. The task force part of it is at this crossroads today, in which they're trying to determine who receives reparations. First and foremost, Sam, I know you have a lot of thoughts on reparations and how it should work, but a task force. Let's talk about this task force for a moment, and why is a task force needed? Because Sheila Jackson Lee is calling for one in her bill too, her national bill. This one was passed in California. Why is that needed, a task force? You're muted, Sam.
Thank you. A task force is going to determine how reparations is doled out and how reparations looks like in the first place. People often conflate reparations and cash grabs, and that's often used to discourage reparations in the first place. Reparations can look like free college tuition, no property taxes on your property, free property, free healthcare, however that looks for the historically oppressed group in the United States that they designate. In terms of the particular question about lineage, that has been a question that has been brewing since the Trump administration, with the emergence of a group whose name I won't mention, that is very particular about differentiating different ethnic groups within the African diaspora. While I have no objection to differentiating between Africans born and raised in America and Africans who immigrate from the Caribbean, from Europe, and from the African continent, I am of no way in support of the xenophobic tone of that group. But at the very same time, we do have to acknowledge that there are members within our African family who were here for centuries and who laid the groundwork for the success that Africans in the United States have today, whether they are from the United States or they're from other parts of the world. But another concern I have with the lineage-based findings within the task force is what's the proof that they're going to want for that? How do you document that? You know, how many of us know our lineage, you know, beyond our grandparents and our great grandparents? What will be the resources in doing that? And is this a ploy pretty much to limit who gets reparations, even among the most deserving of those? You know, you got to look at things both ways in that regard.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I was thinking the same thing, Sam. Is that this whole idea of trying to figure out who deserves it and who doesn't deserve it, the lineage thing, is that just a way in which just to constantly put off real tangible reparations, as you said, maybe free college tuition, maybe free property tax or free property. James, your thoughts on that?
I wholly agree with Sam. I really do. I wholly agree with Sam. I believe that we as African people and African descendants deserve reparations. I will give credit to California. California did go as far as passing some sort of reparations legislation. My home state of Texas ain't doing it. So we have to do this on the national level. I support Sheila Jackson Lee's bill, which would study reparations, and then we need to move forward on it. Does that mean that every Black person, or however you define that, whether it's the Plessy standard of 1/8 of a blood, gets a $10,000 check? I don't know what that means. That's why we need to have it studied in order for the best way for Black people to be compensated for helping to build this nation. And we built this nation.
Yeah, and Sam, again, you mentioned some really tangible things like college tuition and property tax. What other ways can we see reparations? What would be some of the more palatable ways that we can see reparations outside of, you know, some sort of check? Because James, I know that was just a hypothetical number, $10,000, but it could be, you know, based on history, it could be $10 million, and you can argue, well, that's not enough. That's not fair.
You know, reparations first has to be spiritual and mental. You know, there's a lot that has gone on in the United States, and Black people were commodified for hundreds of years, and they were considered currency, you know, equal to that of cattle and materials that are non-human. So reparations has to be mental and spiritual. The degree to which the United States government can carry that, given what I know about them, that is not entirely possible. Beyond that, you got to talk about what real power is in terms of reparations. And the reason why this debate is so powerful to me is because, in speaking about reparations, the Black people who I've come across, some of them, they often uphold their American identity in speaking about, we built this country, we built this country. And you have to think about, in a sense of, while you did build this country, in a sense, is this country really ours to begin with? You know, and it begs the question, you know, when speaking about Marcus Garvey and speaking about the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa, there have been other solutions proposed in the past where the United States government finances the repatriation of Black people who want to go back home to Africa, or cordon off a segment of land, 5 states, to the Republic of New Africa, where Black people could immigrate and form their own nation. So there's a lot to consider, you know, but I'm not of the mindset that just because you build something for free, that is necessarily yours, because we got representation in government, so to speak, but we still have no power collectively. They, at every turn, they will siphon off our power. They will dilute it just to maintain their power. And when I talk about they, I'm talking about institutions, and I'm talking about even those who look like us, who are in those institutions. They are beholden to it and its flavor. And
Sam Collins, we thank you so much this morning for some very riveting commentary. We enjoy it. James, same here. I know you are off to cover something with the Vice President this morning. So we appreciate your hard work, and we appreciate all you for watching Let It Be Known. We will see you tomorrow.